Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and most likely final edition of the Gilead Gleanings pod/video cast. I don't know. I'm sure there's terminology. I don't really know what it is. I can barely be bothered to learn the terminology that I actually know. So this is a series of discussions from First Presbyterian Church in Hastings, Nebraska. My name is Damon Heitman. I serve as the associate minister there currently. And we have invited our congregation to read this book, Gilead, a novel by Marilynne Robinson. And over the course of the summer, and we've just been inviting people to join in discussions about it. And so we are going to continue that discussion today. I am joined by a collection of folks who I will invite to introduce themselves now. Anne, would you like to begin?
That'd be fine. I'm Anne Fairbanks-Bolke, and I'm a longtime member of First Presbyterian Church, and I'm also a retired English professor from Hastings College.
Very nice. Thank you. Jenny, you're next.
Jenny Welsh. I am a newish member of the Presbyterian Church, Congregationalist before that, Methodist before that, and I am an English instructor. I have taught at CCC and online through Bellevue University.
And Constance.
Hi, I'm Constance Malloy. I think I've been a member of First Presbyterian for 27 years. I am a retired English professor at Hastings College, like Anne, and I will be teaching a course at CCC this fall, so I will reach out to you for help a lot.
And so, yeah, as I mentioned a little bit ago, this is our third of these discussions. If you are just starting maybe to read Gilead and you want to sort of go back and listen to them or watch them, you certainly can. They're available. The church has a SoundCloud thing, and the church has a YouTube channel as well. They're up there and available for folks. So we are going to talk about probably the novel, maybe in particular kind of the last third of the novel, maybe the novel as a whole. Also, because we are at the end. I'm assuming we've all made it to the end of the book. I see some nods.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I just made it there this morning, so I came in just under the wire as usual. We'll try not to spoil any sort of kind of major plot points, but we'll also feel relatively free to talk about characters in detail as well. So if we spoil anything for anybody, such is life, I guess. You'll be fine. It's not a big deal.
What we're in life.
Maybe we'll just say spoiler alert right now, like we have finished the book.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, full disclosure, we've all finished the book and we want to talk about it. So I don't have anywhere in particular in mind to start for this conversation, so I'll just step out of the way.
You know, one thing that I wanted to mention at some point, and it might be nice for me to get this out of the way on the podcast, but one of the things that I really enjoyed about this novel with my background is his portrait of falling in love as an older person and having this take him completely by surprise. This happened to me when I was 70, when I met John, before we got married. And the descriptions there, I mean, they're just wonderful. Like on page 206, there's a paragraph in the middle of the page. The next Sunday, she was there again. I was miserable with relief, afraid I might laugh for no reason, afraid I might look at her too long, trying to remind myself she was a stranger, though she had been in my dearest and most inward thoughts for weeks, and that I must not startle her with some uncountable familiarity. I had been to the barber and I was wearing a new shirt, since it seemed only prudent to suppose that my constant, passionate, and most unworthy prayers might be answered. And I'd made a little experiment with hair tonic. Boughton had met me in the road, as he often did those days, and he looked at me and chuckled. And I thought, what an utter and transparent fool I am. And then over at the top of page 208, there's sort of more of this. And he says, and I was 67, when I was doing this stuff. And the reason I say that this is so true to life, when John and I had just started seeing each other, one of the things that I had told my daughter who lives in town was, call me any afternoon, and if you need for me to pick up one of the kids at school, and I'm happy to do that. And so Liz called me one afternoon. It was a really cold day. This kind of matters. And she said, can you pick up Connor at 3:30? It's like 3:15. And I said, no, I'm sorry. I can't. I've got a date. And she said, well, what time's your date? And I said, 6. And she said, 6? It takes you 2.5 hours to get ready for a date? And I said, well, yeah, I'm out of practice. I've got to be sure to get this right. And then another time she called me at the last minute, and I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't. My nails are wet. And again, cold day, and I would have needed gloves, and of course I would have messed up my nail polish again for my date. And there were just all kinds of things like that, hunting through my clothes to see, if there was anything presentable and all that kind of stuff. So our author is right on target with the way he portray, with the way she portrays that. I thought that was really well done.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the way that it seems he's kind of trying to hide his emotions or his feelings, especially from the congregation, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's never used hair tonic before, and all of a sudden he's got hair tonic in, and he's never had a new shirt before, and all of a sudden he's got a new shirt, they all would have known. Those are things people notice of the preacher.
You have some experience with that, Damon?
Well, I mean, you're just up there,
Yeah.
and folks notice. You part your hair the other way, folks notice that sort of stuff. Just if for no other reason than just out of familiarity.
Mm-hmm. So, Anne, one of the lines that you read, or maybe you mentioned a couple of them, that I might laugh for no reason. Good, like I talked last time how I had noticed that mentions of laughter, and I noticed quite a bit of that again here at the end of the novel. But that's one of the few very rare times when our narrator is actually talking about laughter in a happy sense, right? But it's still not even like totally happy. It's like I'm so nervous, or I'm trying to restrain or withhold myself in this situation. So that was on page 206, like you said. And then on 207, it says, at that point, I began to suspect, as I have from time to time, that grace has a grand laughter in it, which struck me as such a beautiful line in the book, and such an interesting, just an interesting way to look at grace. And because, again, I see so much of his laughter as he's talking about Jack and his irritation with Jack, which we can definitely talk about some more. But this is one of those almost happy references to laughter and the role that it played in his life, even though he still does seem to focus much more on the sorrow and the weeping.
Yeah, interesting.
And now that you mention that, Jenny, it makes me think Jack laughs a lot.
Mm-hmm.
When he's having conversations, especially with the narrator, because the narrator will say something and Jack will laugh and then respond in some way. And I'm never quite sure what his laughter is about there.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways it matches his father, because again, I'm still saying it Bofton in my head. Sorry, I know that's different. Everyone has their own way of saying that name. But dear old Bofton, Botten, the best friend, he chuckles, and they sort of rib each other a little bit, and there's that playfulness with them. But with Jack's laughter, it really seems to be, I don't really know what the right word is, if it's sarcastic, or it seems very irritating to our narrator. I mean, he's just constantly annoyed, basically, with Jack, and his, at one point it's described as devilment. Where is that? I don't know. Page 181 I have written down. Jack's, let me get there. That boy was always done, always grinning, always intent on some piece of devilment. And so, he just, from the very beginning, through all the ages and stages of watching Jack grow, has not been pleased by him, is my take.
Yeah, that seems pretty accurate to me.
Yeah.
I sort of get the sense that Jack's laughter is sometimes that sense that Jack feels that he's aware of a joke that no one else is aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, and also, it's a joke at other people's expense.
Yes.
I think so too. There are also a couple places in the novel where the narrator says something and Jack goes white, but he's grinning while he goes white.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually some allusion to his first common law wife and child, the child that died. So that seems to be something that Jack can't quite forget about or forgive himself for. But he seems so like he'd love to be forgiven. He'd love to be saved. He has that experience of standing next to the man at the tent meeting who falls down on the ground and stands up and is saved. And he wishes somehow he could receive that. And then he also asks the narrator about predestination. Is there any way he can redeem himself?
Yeah, and it strikes me also constant that Jack and the narrator have sort of one sort of last sort of big honest conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack reveals what he's gotten himself into in St. Louis. And he's gotten another woman pregnant, and has another common law wife. They're married in the eyes of God. He says, in part because they can't be married in the eyes of the land, and has a son. And in that conversation, he seems very honest about himself. And because he talks about having a conversation with this woman whose name Della, is that right?
Ella.
With her father, and her father's has a very low opinion of him, and Jack says he's right to have that opinion of me. I don't really know, but like there seems to be something about Jack that acknowledges all of the mischief that he was up to as a child, the stealing of things from the narrator's house, and all of those sorts of things, but can't quite bring himself about to actually ask forgiveness for those things, or something to that effect.
And go ahead.
I mean, thank you. I'm kind of wondering though, I don't see him as far along on the path to seeing that he's been wrong and asking forgiveness, I think, as you guys do. I mean, like on page 226, where he was at the tent meeting, and he says he wishes this could have happened, but then at the bottom of that paragraph, and there he was weeping with repentance and relief, while I stood watching him with my hands in my pockets, feeling nothing but anxiety and shame and a certain amusement, if you will forgive me. But then when he goes on, but the next day my father's letter came and I got a decent coat and a bus ticket and I was all right then. there's, to me, there's just something about him that he doesn't really see what his own ethical situation is. I mean, he just can't, smart as he is and all that sort of thing, and he just can't see himself yet. And maybe I'm not seeing him accurately, or maybe I'm being too judgmental. That sure could be.
Well, I get the sense that the narrator shares that sense of what are you doing to your family? You know, he talks the short stories he shares about when Jack was young and all the trouble he got into, all the trouble he instigated, and not even the trouble he got into, more so the trouble he stirred up and got away with. And there's a line that says, his family was so well respected that he got away with it all. That is to say, he was allowed to go right on disgracing his family. And, you know, I don't really know how that changes as he gets older, because there's the experience with the first young woman and child, right? And then he leaves, and then there's this new family, a new relationship, and he comes back, but he's still leaving at the worst possible time. And so he continues to just run out on his family. And I think that's really painful for our narrator, John Ames, to witness for many reasons.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, Jenny. I would say that.
Well, and especially give so the narrator describes how he ended up in the pulpit of the church, and talks about a conversation that he had with his own father. His brother Edwards, one of those two, goes off to the Gulf Coast, I think, builds a house, and then also builds a house intentionally for their parents. And the narrator's father and mother go down. The idea is they're just going to go down there for a year, and then they'll come back, and then they'll just go down there when the weather's bad in Iowa. But they go down and they never come back. And then the narrator has a conversation with his father, and his father's really kind of saying to him, like, you don't have to stay in Gilead, and you don't have to take over the church. And the narrator makes a very intentional decision to stay there and to live up to what he seems to be a responsibility to the family or to the place. And his namesake doesn't do those things.
There's a real split from grandfather Ames and his own son. In other words, the father of the narrator. Mm-hmm. And I think the novel is riddled with this sense of, what do I owe my legacy? At some notes I took on page 82, where he's really struggling with this. I believe I was implicated and am and would have been if I had never seen that pistol. It has been my experience that guilt can burst through the smallest breach and cover the landscape, and it abide in it in pools and dankness, just as native as water. I believe my father was trying to cover up for Cain, more or less. The things that happened in Kansas lay behind it all, as I knew at the time. So he's very confused about the legacy of his grandfather, it seems to me. And as a reader, I tend to side with the narrator and with his father on the side of peace. And yet I mentioned in my email to you guys that there's this undercurrent of, John Brown is really behind this story and the whole story of, the Civil War, and but then it seems to have been dropped, that whole responsibility for abolishing slavery or looking to the rights of Black people has been dropped, so that And I think that comes full circle when Jack comes home and would like to bring his wife and child. And he remembers that there had been a Negro church in Gilead. And the narrator says, well, it was burned. And then, or no, Jack says it was burned. And the narrator kind of tries to make light of that. Oh, it was just a little fire.
Yeah, he said just a nuisance fire. And
Right.
I've been thinking I'm having trouble with what to make of that. Yeah, he really is trying to belittle, and he also apparently doesn't do anything to help to restore the church,
Right.
or anything like that. And this is a novel, everybody's running around helping everybody all the time. And so why isn't that happening in that situation? I mean,
Right.
once you sort of brought that up, I thought, yeah, that's odd too.
Okay, and this was the
Yeah.
church that the grandfather would go to rather than hearing his son preach in the Congregationalist church. I wanted to hear some real preaching. So he'd go to the Negro church.
And it strikes me that at the end, at the very end of the novel, the narrator describes Gilead as sort of being a faded hope, that it was established as this sort of abolitionist stronghold, and for a place that could provide safe shelter to folks, and it's now that passion has dimmed. There's a whole bit about embers and them coming back to life for a little while and then going back sort of dormant. And I wonder I found myself thinking today about John Lewis and the legacy of folks who were really ardent during the civil rights movement, and about the ways that we are all sort of called to carry on those things, but the fire fades after a little while, and then new oxygen gets breathed into it and it comes back to life. But so this makes sense to me, thinking then about the narrator and his dad as being sort of reflections, but smaller reflections of the grandfather's flame.
Yeah. At the last couple pages, I noticed that imagery. Let's see. I'm on 246. What have I to leave you? He's addressing his son. But the ruins of old courage, the lore of old gallantry and hope. Well, as I've said, it's all an ember now, and the good Lord will surely someday breathe into it flame again. And then on the next page, toward the top, this whole town does look like whatever hope becomes after it begins to weary a little, then weary a little more. But hope deferred is still hope. And then he says to his, I think sometimes of going into the ground here as a last wild gesture of love. I too will smolder away for the time until the great and general incandescence. And then he says to his son, I will pray you find a way to be useful. I'll pray and then I'll sleep. But I wonder if in light of what I was reading about last night, I wonder if that usefulness is again in the use of justice rather than peace.
Of course, you can say you don't have peace without justice. And so
And I think that point comes up here in the novel too.
Yeah. Well, and I think also the father, in some way, he's kind of a pallid comparison to the grandfather. On the other hand, if the father is a sincere pacifist, that's going to look neutral or negative compared to somebody who is out and, doing midnight raids and, and involved in all sorts of violence. And so I'm not quite sure what to make of that either.
And then we had talked about, oh, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, those lines that you were just reading, and where he's really talking about the prairie there at the end, reminds me of what we talked about in our very first conversation here about the land being a character, and how much the setting comes into play. And I was struck, I grew up in South Dakota, in a place that doesn't look much different really from where I live now, and I've driven around South Dakota and Nebraska enough now to these descriptions of these small towns are just so accurate, at least in my mind, of what these little towns look like. And granted, I grew up in a different time than when this is set, but one, like we talked about with Cather and the prairie especially being a thing in her novels, this seems to also, just the fact that it comes up here at the very end was really, it sort of grabbed my attention. Plus, I also am obsessed with the prairie sky. I don't want to live by the mountains because I want to see the sky. So I was like, oh, that's what we're talking about here. So, it jumped out at me a little bit.
Yeah, and connected to that sort of imagery, Jenny, there is a part where the narrator talks about each day is actually the same day. It's not a new day. The light is always the light. It's us who turn through it.
Mm-hmm.
And which I just thought was a very striking and lovely image, and related to that sort of prairie openness sort of an idea. And I think also related to the sense of, we've talked a lot about generations, and that maybe part of it is this idea that each generation is really the same generation, but the passion changes from generation to generation, or that sort of thing.
There's a great line about that. I don't have it marked, but I remember it. It said something about how the issues that come up for one generation, the next generation, I can't remember how she wrote it or how our narrator said it, but something about almost as if they reject it, but it's really the sort of the same thing playing out. Again, I'll see if I can find it, but that definitely see that generational loop.
Yeah.
Did anyone else notice the first hard break in the novel? The first, it stops, and there are no chapters, but there's actually a whole page and a half of blank page, and then a new section. I'm like, wow, you're 215 pages in before that happened. That was a moment in the reading.
Yeah, and is it the first line after the break is Jack has a wife and son? Is that what it is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely done on purpose. Definitely a big thing, and I don't know what that is. If that's because our narrator doesn't know that at first. He has all this, I don't know, maybe I call it angst and irritation with Jack coming back, and he wants to warn his wife and child. I mean, we see that play out over and over again in the letter that he's writing. I want to tell you, but I don't want to tell you. I really want to tell you. I really want to warn you, but I'm not going to. And he doesn't even know this part at the time. And I don't know, maybe this actually makes him feel better towards Jack, because he's not so worried now that Jack will try to replace him when he's gone. Well, he already has a wife and child, so he won't try to take mine. I don't know if that's accurate.
I think that he definitely seems to soften towards Jack after that. And I noticed a lot of parallels between the way that Jack describes how his relationship with Della developed, and how the narrator's relationship with his current wife developed. Like they both to me, they both describe it as a thing that they just couldn't help but do.
Mhm.
And now all of a sudden Jack has a son and a wife that he wants to be with, but can't. And I think the narrator really connects to that feeling.
But then Jack barges in with the comment about, but my wife is educated.
Mhm.
You know, Jack, he always has to, the meanness factor always seems to be there. And, you know, and I also wonder, and I don't know if this is part of what the author is bringing to the novel or not, but I mean, I have other questions about Jack's behavior. I mean, why he went ahead and got involved with Della when it's no secret that they couldn't stay in St. Louis. You know, those miscegenation laws, you know, were right out there. And of course, as her father reminds him, you know, her life was fine. And then here comes this man who is going to compromise her and who apparently, you know, doesn't, you know, and I'm gonna sound like a, you know, cranky person I am, I guess, but you know, why doesn't he get a job? I mean, for heaven's sake, he's this handsome man, he's presentable, he's obviously smart, he's grown up in a family that lavished love on him. This is after World War II, during the heyday of the middle class, when companies were hiring all sorts of people. Why in the world is he just kind of doing shady stuff off at the edges? And if this woman means so much to him, again, get a job and save some money and go somewhere where you can get married. It's not like he's wearing a ball and chain and left in St. Louis. You know, as I said, I've got a problem here with Jack. He's not my favorite.
Well, Jack does have a job, though. He gets a pretty good job, and he can afford a place where they can all live together. And then they get careless and are seen together in a park, and he gets fired.
That's right.
Yeah, but you know, he could go go somewhere else and get a job. I really.
Well,
I think I maybe not.
Oh, I think that's what he's trying to do in Gilead, but you know, I think I've already lost her.
Yeah, well, and you know, if he has changed like that, and if he is trying to do that and do the right thing in Gilead, then that's great. Then he has changed and he is doing better.
Yeah, I wonder if there isn't some part of Jack, and I'm reflecting back now to his conversation about predestination, if there isn't some part of Jack that just feels that this is just his lot in life, to be a perpetual source of shame for people around him, and part of his conflict is between accepting that or not accepting it.
Yeah, we don't know where that started. Go ahead, Jenny.
Well, I had a question. Did you have something else to add to the other?
No, go ahead.
I had a question about names, and Constance, I know that was something you were looking at in the reading. We do finally learn Mrs. Ames's name. That is given. If his son's name was given, I missed it, so I need some enlightenment there if anyone else saw that. But I'm looking at page 228, and this is when Jack is telling his story with Della and about his child, And, oh, this is a conversation with Della's father, okay? And he says, he knew my full name because Jack claims to be part of the Ames family. Like, he's trying to sort of like build up his reputation based on that family's name and their connection to John Brown. At least that was my understanding of that. But he says he knew my full name because that is what Della wanted to call the baby. I was so relieved when I heard that. But then down at the bottom of that same page, it says, my son's name is Robert Boston, whatever, Miles. And I'm very confused. Whose son is named that? And his name is John Ames something Boston, right?
Right.
So what, I don't know. I'm lost. I'm lost as to whose child is named what and what these sons' names are.
Yeah, Jack's son is Robert Boughton Miles. So he named his child after his, or they named the child after his father.
Okay, thank you. Now I get it. Now I see how I misread that, because I was thinking she wanted to continue the John Ames name. That is the line. What?
She did. I mean, that was what she was proposing.
But then
they wanted to name the baby John Ames Miles.
Okay. But then they ended up with
changed their mind somehow for some reason.
For whatever reason, I got very hung up on that page reading and went, I don't understand what is happening here. And I was really looking for the name of the son the whole time. I just thought that we would get that.
Well, and I mean, and I really looked for it too, and I don't think it's there.
No,
and I think that, you know, something is going on with that. It would be so easy. And so I think that's something I'm going to think hard about between now and next week. Not that I'll necessarily come up with anything, but.
Yeah. Well, I know too much because I read that short story and read some criticism and so forth. So I do know what the narrator's son is named, but.
Okay.
Except that why, except the effect of not having it included in the novel is what kind of interests me.
Right.
And so, you know, I need to meditate. And by the way, my issue of the New Yorker that has that story in it finally got here. It didn't until like 2 days ago. And I'm waiting to read it because I want to base what I'm just kind of to keep my focus.
Right. I've wanted to sort of dive ahead into the other 3 novels, but I figure I must wait.
So, Anne, do you have any preliminary thoughts or theories on what the significance of leaving the child unnamed might be?
I really don't. I mean, I'm like completely flummoxed. I mean, in one way, and this really isn't saying much, it's another part of that, you know, one generation on to the next pattern. But that really doesn't say much.
If he feels like the pattern was interrupted because his friend named his own baby after him.
Right.
So how can he carry on? How can he do it too? He's like, that was taken from me without any warning. You know, he talks about that. I think that's in the last section of the book about what it was like to be in that moment of, are you serious? This is happening? And so maybe he feels, I mean, again, I have no idea what the name is. Maybe he feels like he can't, you know?
But I mean, whatever name he decided on, why isn't it anywhere in the novel?
Yeah.
I mean, why doesn't it say, and Bobby, as I write this, I'm thinking blah, blah, blah. You know, just that one word of direct address, but she doesn't do it. So I just find that really interesting, and especially given how important names are in the novel.
Did you notice how we learn the wife's name? Who says her name?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was Jack who says
Yes.
the name.
Yes.
I have to go answer the door. I'm the only one in the office right now, so excuse me for a moment, but keep
We'll
talking.
keep talking. Yeah, but Damon's right. It was Jack. And her name is Lila, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, but he, in conversation, like, I think it's when the narrator is maybe asleep and over, like, listening to them, and Jack names her in conversation, and I was so surprised. Well, maybe not, because he doesn't bother, I don't know if bother is the right word, but he doesn't name his son in the letter. And so I guess it's in character in that sense that he also doesn't name his wife directly, but the fact that it's Jack who does it, I just thought that was interesting too.
That's interesting. Yeah. But again, that the author doesn't structure the novel so that the son's name is revealed. I just still think that's a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Is it perhaps because she realizes she's going to write a sequel?
I was going to say, we've got a franchise going here. This.
Right.
I don't. So sorry to step away for a moment.
That's okay.
We get in the Bible, we sometimes get unnamed characters. There's one I think maybe we had talked about this before, in the Road to Emmaus. We get a disciple who's named and the other disciple, and they're traveling someplace. And I seem to recall in the way that those stories were developed, they were developed as oral tradition. And so they were stories that you told folks when you were at worship together or around the table or prayer meeting, whatever the case might be. And in some ways, sometimes the way that having an unnamed character can work is that then it's sometimes easier for the audience to imagine themselves in that role, or to imagine someone that they know well in that unnamed disciple. It could have been Joe, could have been Tom, could have been Joe's cousin, it could have been anybody. And so I wonder if maybe that plays a role in this or not, in that sort of sense of, I don't know, that's just another insight and maybe a tangent.
But I think there's a theme of usurping of things that you might catch as you go on in the series.
I'm sorry. There's a sense of what of names?
Usurping.
Usurping. It's what I thought you said. Yeah.
Because the narrator gets his name taken away before he can give it to his own child.
Yeah.
And to somebody he doesn't respect very much.
Do you think that part of the narrator's objection to his name being given away is that now all of a sudden he has this obligation? He feels some sort of obligation that he wouldn't really have felt or had otherwise?
Maybe, because it's supposed to be. I mean, it's supposed to be an honor to him. Prizing him during the christening.
And we get to the very end, and he says that he talks about Jack was his son.
Right.
He says.
And he offers him a blessing too.
Yeah, and I think he feels as though he didn't do a great job raising him.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, so Jenny, you were on page 228. One thing that I wanted to point out because I enjoyed it very much.
Okay.
So this is Jack. He is with Della's family. Della has just given birth. Della is a person of color. All of her family are people of color. Jack is white. He's the only white person there. And they're suspect that, they're not big fans of Jack. That's his perception, at least.
Imagine that. Excuse me.
Right. When he arrives there, her dad isn't home, so they let him stay. They let him hang out at the house. And he's in with Della, and she's resting, and they're talking every once in a while. He writes, well, this is how it reads. The women would take the baby away if he cried. They brought in some supper. I thought maybe things were improving, but they were all just being Christian. Which I thought was very, I really liked that.
Yeah.
And I think sort of highlights the difference between feigning forgiveness and actually forgiving, which I think is something that the narrator himself wrestles with and struggles with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when the father asks him to go away, he says, "This time I make no appeal to your honor."
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
As in, you don't have any. And I suppose he had a right to say that.
How do you think the narrator by the end of the novel, how do you think the narrator feels about Jack?
I think that scene where the narrator gives the blessing is very touching because Jack receives it so humbly. He puts his head on his shoulder, and I should find that, but
So it looks like it maybe starts maybe around 2:39. That's when he sees him walking up towards the bus stop.
right.
And then 2:41, I think, is kind of where that starts, right?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Then the thing I would like actually is to bless you.
Mm-hmm.
After he tries again to give him some money.
Right.
Or maybe he tries again after that to give him some money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think part of what is yeah, I think part of what was powerful about that scene was that by this point the narrator has also acknowledged that he feels that he didn't do a very good job the first time that he was given an opportunity to bless Jack. That the surprise of him having his name took him out of that moment, and he was thinking about any number of other things, including probably the child that he had lost and the wife that he had lost. And then now this is a moment when, and in this depiction, he's very much present in that moment with Jack.
Well, anyway, at this moment, I told him it was an honor to bless him, and that was also absolutely true. And then the bus came, and he says, "We all love you, you know." And he laughs, and he says, "You're all saints." And then he goes back, and even though his friend Botten is unconscious and dying, he tells him that he's, whispers in his ear that he's blessed his son.
Yeah.
I think there's an odd bit of resolution, I guess, between the two of them. I mean, I definitely see a shift in how the narrator looks at Jack, in part to the offering of that blessing, and by also it sort of falls in line with what he's been doing the whole life of this person, this child, is sort of covering up might be the wrong word to say, right? But he never went running to his friend every time the friend's child did something wrong. It wasn't like he was constantly trying to butt into their relationship, but and so he is still sort of glossing over. Maybe that's for the benefit of his friendship, you know, like he loves his friend so much that I'm going to do what I can to send your son on in peace so that you can go out in peace. I mean, it's a very tangled, and rightfully so, with the names and the families and the, you know, these lives led together. I mean, you are interconnected, you are very much involved, but then also you all have your own stuff. And so they're all still individuals too. And, you know, we're getting one perspective, one very long letter, right? Telling us about his perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
And sorry, I had to check the door again. But, and the narrative, and maybe you mentioned this, Jenny. So if you did, I apologize. I mean, the narrator mentions that sort of very specifically. It says, like, we can never really fully know one another. We can never really fully know each other's motivations and intentions.
Right. Yeah. Damon, did you notice near the end where the narrator, like we were talking last time about how do you end something like this? How do you take a letter that you're writing before you die and stop doing it, short of just, you know, stopping? And it does say that somewhere. It is, I have it written down somewhere, page 238. So very near the end. There's at the bottom of page 238 is that signal to the end where he just says, I think I'll put an end to all this writing. I read it over more or less, and I found some things of interest in it, mainly the ways I have been drawn back into this world in the course of it. And so it's the sort of that I guess we really don't know at this point what exactly is happening with his health or how he's choosing to spend his time, but he's telling us, well, I'm done with this exercise. And I don't know if that has to do with Jack leaving, and maybe our narrator looking at his own son and what time they have left together and saying, okay, well, I've told you enough of my story, so now I'm just going to be with you while I can.
Although I think we do have a sense in toward the end of the novel of how tired the narrator is getting. You know, the smallest exertions sort of wear him out. You know, he's always, you know, I had to sit down for a while when I got here, when I got there. And so he would probably have a sense, just for physical reasons, that he needs to wrap this up.
That's true.
Yeah. And I do think it has something to do with this conflict between he and Jack, that when they're able to have that conversation at the bus stop, that provides him with some sort of closure, I suppose, on that.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense too. Yeah, because there is a shift there, as Jenny said, after that last encounter between the narrator and Jack.
I get the sense, and that you feel that maybe that shift wasn't really earned.
Yeah, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Although after this conversation, I am seeing Jack a little bit more favorably than I was before. I no longer think he's completely like Shakespeare's Richard III, which was who he was always reminding me of. You know, if you've read Richard III lately, you know, he's the one who's determined to prove a villain. He's going to go out and do all the mean things he can. He's going to use women badly and then just slough them off when he's done, and just do whatever he darn well pleases. And
yeah, Jack definitely has some of those tendencies.
Yeah.
But in the final conversation between the narrator and Jack, a couple different times the narrator says, and this is the truest thing I've ever said, and I really did feel that way. And like he's seeing things differently.
oh yeah, I think there is a shift there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that part of that is related to he finally knows Jack's story, right? There's so many times leading up to that where he's been gone for 20 years. I don't know what he's been up to.
Mhm.
Maybe he's been up to good stuff. Maybe he's been up to bad stuff. And so many times when he feels that Jack is hiding something from him, or he wishes that he just could tell what was actually going on. And when he finally knows Jack's story, then which I think is true of a lot of our relationships with other folks. Like once we actually know a little bit more about someone's story, then it's easier to relate to them. It's easier to understand their pain or to connect it to some of our pain. There's a part in here where he talks about Boughton. He imagines that if all of Boughton's other kids were home, Jack wasn't there, Boughton would really want to be with Jack. And he describes Jack as a wound that got a lot of attention, as wounds tend to do, or a favored wound, kind of something like that. I'll find it maybe in a little bit. But it reminded me, there's a book, it's called Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen, and it comes up a lot in pastoral care classes and conversations. And the core concept is this: the more that we are aware of our own pain, the things that have caused us suffering or anxiety, and the more that we can talk about those things, then that helps us to be able to relate to those things, similar things that we see in others, right? And I think that once he finally has this conversation, the narrator and Jack, then he is sort of able to connect the pain that they have in some way, and see him in a less, I guess, in a more three-dimensional way and in a less two-dimensional way.
And possibly that last time that we see him going to Boughton's bedside to tell him that he's offered this blessing and it's been received really well. It's sort of like he's trying to heal that wound. You know, maybe that's the balm we've been looking for.
Well, I did not pay as much attention to what happened between our narrator and his own father, in the sense of, like, when you started, retelling that part, I went, oh yeah, the fact that he left with the brother who had been estranged for a while, right? And here he is literally carrying on the family pulpit and being left by the family. And I did not think about that in terms of what that would have done to his own psyche and interactions and perceptions of fatherhood and being a son and all of that. But I definitely think that is a component to how and who he is.
Yeah, there are lots of prodigal sons, as I've said before, in this novel.
There sure are. And there are also a lot of kind of bearing the burden of having parents. I'm gonna dig some more into that before next week. Sort of what should the father have done to honor the grandfather? I think that's kind of a question. I mean, and given that they both have such strong beliefs, but that those beliefs are incompatible, how does that work? And I also find it interesting that the narrator goes through that discussion of the 10 Commandments, and then the next person to enter the scene is Jack, where we kind of can tick off, which commandments. But then the other person that we find in the novel who's broken some commandments is the grandfather, particularly stealing. Although, of course, he's stealing because he's going to give all this away. He thinks there are people out there who need it more than the people who put the clothes on the line, or that sort of thing.
Goes to another church at one point, and when the offering gets back as far as he is, he takes the whole thing and dumps it into his hat.
Yeah, that the story comes up that he's not only stealing from his own family, he's taking that's in Botton's church. That's in the Presbyterian church
Right.
that allegedly happened, and the narrator said, "Oh, it kind of fits. It wouldn't surprise me if that happened."
Well, and it's so funny. He says, "Well, but he thought that the Presbyterians had been hoarding."
Yeah. Yeah, I wish. Yeah, Greg. Where's Greg? He should have been in this conversation.
That's right. Yeah.
What's going on? So I know that we've been chatting for a little while, and I suspect that we could chat for a good deal while longer. But maybe folks don't want to listen for a good deal while longer. Though, why wouldn't they? I mean, so. But maybe a good place to sort of wrap up is maybe just something that you're going to take away, something that you think will maybe stick with you, something you'll keep reflecting on from the novel as a whole. I probably should have warned you that I was going to ask that question earlier.
Well, I was very surprised. I guess again, second time I've read this, but I forgot that there was another book right after this, which that one I have not read, the Home one, which is the story of Glory, or this same sort of story but told by Glory's perspective, if I'm understanding the blurb correctly. And it just made me think of, I do think it would be interesting to read that book and to see how things would shift with a different narrator and a different perspective, which kind of takes from what we talked about today and this reminder that we really don't know other people's experiences and stories. Even people we know very well and are dear friends with, we don't always know I don't know if we can know their inner workings. And I think that's an important thing to carry with us as a reminder.
Yeah. Others?
Well, we've been tossing around the meaning of the title, and I don't think although I put this in my email to you I did discover that John Brown had founded the League of Gileadites, which was an all-black, the members were all black, but again, they were, their intention was to prevent slaves' recapture. And so, that does again point to the importance of the John Brown understory.
Yeah. And I Googled that hymn that Dwight mentioned, there is a balm in Gilead. And I don't know that I'd ever heard it before, but one of the things that I hadn't realized about it is is that it's an African-American spiritual. And so, not a hymn that, some professional hymn writer, somebody wrote. So I thought, that was really interesting too, about all the, about slavery and how, and sort of how individuals and the country, I guess, can heal from the continuing wounds of slavery. And that's something I'm thinking about a lot in my life anyway right now. And I think that's relevant to the novel. And that's one of the things I'm going to keep thinking about between now and next week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you, Anne, or following along that sort of line of thinking of this. I'm sort of captivated by this sense of the author talks about, and we read the passage that talking about Gilead as this looks like a place, or like this looks like faded hope, or whatever, hope whatever it is. Someone will remember what the actual line is.
Yeah.
And thinking about Grandpa to me is very clearly, he's supposed to be a prophet. He's a prophetic figure. The narrator at the end of them talks about he had received Grandpa's mantle, which is Elijah and Elisha, the passing on of the mantle from one prophet to the next. And sometimes in the Bible, when that happens, the prophet who takes over is not really quite as good as as the one who came before. And thinking about that sort of, what are the hopes that we should be carrying on? What are the fires that we do need to breathe? What are the embers that we need to breathe new life into? Like what are the prophetic roles? What are the faded hopes that we should be looking to revive or to restore? And I guess I'm thinking more from a cultural, societal perspective, and from a church perspective, I think as well. I think that we are called to be prophets, and what does that mean in today's time? And so I think those are some of the questions or the lingering thoughts or images that will stick with me from Gilead. So, boy, okay. So, and on Thursday, this coming Thursday, the 30th, is that right?
Sure. Who knows?
Summer.
Time doesn't have as much meaning
COVID-19, we don't have any.
as it once did.
Very weird
Yes.
concept.
That is the 30th. Thursday, July 30th at 6:30. We'll have another open Zoom meeting, and folks can join in on that. And I would bet you that would be one of the questions that would maybe be asked, or things that could be considered. So if folks have something, they can be prepping and thinking about that. It's not too late to join in. If there are folks out there who are listening or watching and would like to, let the church office know, and we'll get you on the email list and get you connected to that as well. So my deep, sincere thanks and appreciation to Anne and to Constance and to Jenny for joining in and being a part of this. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been a highlight of my every other Thursday for the last 5 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever the case may be. So, and hopefully it has been for others as well.
I echo that.
Yes, same here.
So, who knows? Maybe we'll do something like this again next summer. Who knows? What the world is a mystery, I suppose. Just as the narrator would say, is everyone. So, with all that said and done, my thanks again to everyone. Thanks everyone for watching, for listening along, and I guess until next time, toodaloo.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.